Both of this week's stories are about being an Easter people and sharing our love of God with others by offering up our skills or our talents. And much like this week's lesson on Tabitha, we all have ways we can share, and our gifts that are made in love are very important to God. So I hope you will enjoy this week's stories. Our first one is called Miss Fannie's Hat. And Jan Karen's book about Miss Fannie is one of my favorite things to read with kids. And it reminds us of so many ways we can share our love as an Easter people. Miss Fannie has lots of hats, and each one is her favorite. When she wears her red felt with the big feather, she looks in the mirror and says, "I just love this hat." And her friends at church say, "Miss Fannie, we just love that hat." When she wears her green velour with the fancy pin, she says, "I sure do love this hat." And when her Sunday school teacher says, "Miss Fannie, I sure do love that hat." And when she wears her famous pink straw with silk roses, she always says, "I really love this hat." And everyone else really loves it too. Miss Fannie is 99 years old and very small. In fact, she's grown to be about the same size she was when she was a little girl. Miss Fannie and her daughter, Miss Wanda, live together. Miss Wanda makes breakfast every morning. "Don't make me much breakfast," says Miss Fannie, sitting on the sofa in her robe. Miss Wanda tries to mind because Miss Fannie is her mama, but she forgets and brings her a piece of sausage, buttered toast with jelly, a scrambled egg, a cup of herb tea. "Oh my, this is way too much," Miss Fannie always says, but then she goes on and eats it all up. Every morning after breakfast, Miss Fannie reads her Bible. She has worn out 3 Bibles, reading them over and over. And her very favorite verse is, "With God, all things are possible." Every Sunday, Miss Wanda washes Mrs. Fannie's hair. Miss Fannie takes off her robe and stands around in her slip looking very tiny. She gets on a stool and sticks her head in the sink. Miss Wanda runs the warm water and puts shampoo on her mama's head and scrubs it until it lathers up. Then she scrubs some more. "That feels good," says Miss Fannie. After she washes her mama's hair, Miss Wanda rolls it up in tight little curls all over her head. The curlers are really hard to sleep in, but Miss Fannie doesn't care one bit. She knows that when she goes to church the next day, she will look beautiful. On Sunday morning, Miss Fannie puts on a pretty dress and high-heeled shoes. She puts on earrings and necklaces and lipsticks and blush and powder. Next, Miss Wanda combs out her mama's hair, which is all nice and soft and gray, like the feathers of a dove. And finally, after all that fussing with her hair, she goes and hides it under a hat. Miss Fannie has 3 black hats, 2 red hats, a green hat, 2 white hats, 1 navy hat, 3 beige hats, 1 brown hat, and the famous pink straw with roses. Because she never wears the same one twice in a row, some people think she has a whole closet full of hats, which of course she does. One Sunday, Miss Fannie's handsome young preacher came to her and said, "Miss Fannie, would you kindly give us one of your beautiful hats? It'll go in the auction to fix up the church in time for Easter." That same day, Miss Wanda helped her mama get out her hats and put them on the bed and the dressing table. Miss Fannie closed her bedroom door. "Lord," she said out loud, "I'd appreciate it if you'd help me make the best choice." She always talked to God as if he was right there. Miss Fannie walked around the room and looked at each of her hats. The green velour with the fancy pin was very old and still very beautiful. During the terrible flood of 1916, she had crossed the swollen river on a ferry to visit her mother and father. As she stood on the railing holding onto her beautiful hat, a house had floated by, almost close enough to touch. And over there was her wide-brimmed felt with the gleaming black feather. That feather came from the tail of a hawk that had tried to kill her hens and biddies. And she grabbed the hawk around the neck, and before you could say doodly squat, that hawk never bothered her chickens again. Miss Fannie picked up the hat made of soft brown velvet and stroked it. It had always reminded her of Flower, her grandmother's cow. When Miss Fannie was just 7 years old, she'd started milking the brown, velvety white Flower. Every evening, she carried the milk to the spring in a bucket and set it on the icy water to keep cool. Later, her mama would pour the milk into a churn, and Miss Fannie would churn it into butter, just like you buy in the store, except better. She realized that each one of her hats was like a friend, and each one brought back special memories. Finally, Miss Fannie came to her most favorite hat of all, the pink straw with silk roses. She had worn it every Easter Sunday for 35 years. It always made her feel brand new, like Easter itself. But she wasn't the only one who thought it was special. Everyone at church looked for her pink hat on Easter Sunday, just as they looked for tulips and daffodils to bloom in the spring. Miss Fannie took the pink straw out of its round box and put it on, even though she was wearing her oldest house dress with a torn pocket. She looked in the mirror and sighed. In her heart, she did not want to give her hat away. Not at all. She took a deep breath and repeated her favorite Bible verse. And as she placed her hat back in its round box, she said, "You know, this hat really could raise a lot of money." She put the lid on the box and said, "Maybe it could help fix our old pipe organ." When she tied the string around the lid, she said, "Why, it might be able to mend the crack in the church bell or put on a whole new roof." Suddenly, she discovered she was very, very excited. At the church auction, the handsome young preacher held up the pink hat with roses and looked around. What am I bid for Miss Fannie's famous hat? The bidding took off lickety-split. At last, here was something more exciting to bid on than a set of kitchen canisters and an umbrella stand. Bang went the gavel, sold to the lady in the front row. The lady in the front row gave the preacher a check and seemed very, very pleased with herself. "That's a lot of money," said Miss Wanda, who was impressed. Miss Fannie clapped her hands. It was enough to really get things fixed around here. She knew that she would not miss her favorite hat one bit, but she did wonder what hat she would wear on Easter morning. On Easter Sunday, Miss Fannie got up very early. She sat on the side of her bed and took the curlers out of her hair. Although she thought and thought, she didn't have the slightest idea which hat she would wear. The red felt with the big feather? Too hot. Her green velour with the fancy pin? Too wintry. And there was no use even thinking about the pink straw, which, of course, would have been just right. When it was time to leave for church, Miss Fannie looked beautiful. She was wearing her best dress, which was the color of pale green apples. And she was wearing her best jewelry, her best gloves, and a white corsage. "It's time to go," said Miss Fannie, picking up her cane and taking Miss Wanda's arm. Miss Wanda could not believe her eyes. Her mama was going out the door without wearing any hat at all. When they arrived at church, Miss Fannie couldn't believe her eyes. On either side of the freshly painted church, someone had planted a bed of glorious pink roses. Pink roses were also planted on the walkway, under the stained glass windows, and in front of the old fence by the street. "Oh, Mama," said Miss Wanda, "it looks just like your pink hat." The handsome young preacher greeted them on the steps and gave them each a big hug. "We hope you're pleased, Miss Fannie. We were able to patch the bell and fix the organ, and your beautiful hat made it possible to buy all these roses." Miss Fannie laughed with delight. They didn't see an old woman at all. What they saw was a young girl, her hair as soft as the feathers of a dove. And now, when people pass the little white church, they think they're seeing a garden of dazzling pink roses. But what they're really seeing is Miss Fannie's hat. And it will always, always be her favorite. I wonder how Miss Fannie's hats made her feel. I wonder if you have something special that means a lot to you. I wonder what you think of Miss Fannie's favorite Bible verse. With God, all things are possible. I wonder why Miss Fannie gave away her favorite hat. Can giving something away that is special to you make you feel excited? I wonder what this story says to you about giving. And I wonder how Miss Fannie and Tabitha are similar.